You ever get that feeling that someone or something is watching you, even when the house is empty? That cold, creeping sense in the back of your neck that tells you you're not alone? A few years ago, I moved with my parents into a new house. Not just a house, a mansion in the woods, far away from the city, the suburbs, even any neighbors. To me, it felt like a fortress surrounded by silence. But the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, it waits. My parents had bought it for space, but I think, deep down, it was the perfect place for secrets. This particular week, they left for a family trip. They offered for me to go, but I had schoolwork piling up, so I stayed behind. Just me and the house, or so I thought. The first night, the house creaked in ways I hadn't noticed before. Floors groaning, walls whispering, shadows that didn't belong to any light. At first, I told myself it was just a big empty house settling, but soon little things started to feel wrong. Doors I had closed would be slightly ajar. Footsteps echoed in empty halls. And sometimes, when I thought I was alone, I'd catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. Something small, something quick. By the second night, the feeling had grown unbearable. The air felt thicker, almost watching me, and my thoughts kept wandering to the attic, the one space we hadn't unpacked yet. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was all imagination. But when I heard the soft thud of something landing upstairs, followed by a slow, deliberate scrape along the floorboards, I knew I wasn't alone. Not really. And the longer I stayed, the more the house seemed alive, studying me, waiting. The more time I spent alone in that house, the more its size started to feel like a trap. Endless hallways stretched out like tunnels, lined with empty rooms that seemed to watch me as I passed. The house had been built over a century ago, and you could feel its history clinging to the walls. The creaks, the drafts, the whispers of long-forgotten footsteps. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. For the first 2 days, that worked. School, friends, a little time at home, it all felt normal. But on the third day, everything began to shift. I returned home later than usual, the sky already dark and heavy, the forest around the house pressing in like a wall of shadows. My body ached with exhaustion, and all I wanted was to collapse into my bed. I dropped my school bag by the door and trudged upstairs, barely noticing how silent the house had become. The usual settling noises were missing, replaced by a stillness that made my skin crawl. Every step on the second-floor stairs echoed too loudly, as if something unseen was listening, waiting for me to reach the top. As I reached the top of the stairs, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The long main hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit by the fading light from the windows, and that uneasy feeling I'd been ignoring all week hit me full force. One of the spare bedroom doors was slightly ajar. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd left it open earlier, but a gnawing sense of wrongness clawed at me. I walked closer and peeked inside. Just a bed, a few random pieces of furniture, nothing unusual, yet everything about the room felt off. I shut the door, but the unease didn't leave. My room was at the very end of this hallway, a path I walked several times a day, and there was no way I hadn't noticed that door before. The thought made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. In a house this massive, open doors always felt wrong. They made the empty rooms feel alive, like they were watching, waiting for someone to wander by. Before settling in for the night, I forced myself to do a quick walk-through, avoiding the rooms, trying not to think about the sense that something unseen was shifting just out of sight, following me silently. I didn't bother looking into every room, just keeping an eye out for anything that felt off. Seeing nothing unusual, I tried to convince myself that I had simply never noticed the door before. Maybe it had even swung open on its own while I was out after all. Old houses like this had their own way of moving. Trying to push the unease aside, I went to my room and turned on the TV, hoping the noise would calm my mind. But it didn't help. The vast silence of the house pressed in on me from every side. Being alone in a mansion this big made every shadow feel alive, every empty room a potential hiding place for something I couldn't see. The unknown was the real terror, the not knowing what could be lurking just out of sight. Nearly an hour passed before hunger drove me out of my room. I walked down the hallway toward the first floor, every step echoing unnaturally, and realized how unsettling it was that a house this big could feel so empty, and yet so aware of me. I kept most of the lights on as I moved through the house, still walking past long stretches of darkness and heavy shadows that felt way too close for comfort. While I was in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing in the far living room. Every time I glanced up, the space was empty, just darkness swallowing the furniture. I started questioning myself, wondering if my nerves were finally getting the better of me. I told myself I was overreacting, letting pointless anxiety take control, and forced myself to ignore it. After making dinner, I headed back upstairs, trying to keep my mind occupied. But the moment I reached the hallway, a sharp chill ran straight through my body. One of the doors, the same one, was open again. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring down the dim hallway for what felt like forever. My thoughts went completely blank. There was no logical explanation this time. Standing there in the silence, I felt a terrifying realization creep in. Maybe this house wasn't just old. Maybe it was haunted. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't so sure that I was alone. I'd never believed in haunted houses, at least not until I found myself standing in a century-old mansion, buried deep in the woods. Moving as quietly as I could, I walked back toward the spare room. My hand hesitated before pushing the door open wider. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as before. I scanned the room carefully, searching for anything: footprints, disturbed dust, furniture shifted even slightly. But there was nothing. No evidence, no explanation. The lack of answers only made my stomach twist tighter. Feeling more uneasy than before, I retreated to my room, shut the door, and locked it behind me. I texted my parents, trying to sound casual, asking if they'd ever noticed the spare room door opening on its own, or if there was something wrong with it. They replied almost immediately, confused, saying they had no idea what I was talking about, and had never noticed anything unusual. I told them not to worry, that it was probably nothing. But as I stared at my phone in the quiet room, I knew I was lying to them and to myself. Something wasn't right in that house, and whatever it was, it knew I was alone. With every passing second, my nerves grew worse. It was like my body already knew something was wrong before my mind could accept it. I was sitting on my bed with the TV on, eating, when I heard it clear, unmistakable footsteps in the hallway. I froze. Instinctively, I grabbed the remote and paused the TV. In the sudden silence, a heavy thump echoed right outside my bedroom door. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Then, nothing. No creaks, no movement. The silence was so complete, it felt suffocating. A moment later, someone or something tapped on my door. Not a normal knock. Slow, soft, deliberate, like they knew I was listening. My mind couldn't process what was happening. It felt unreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. After what felt like an entire minute of silence, I finally forced myself to speak. I shouted that I'd already called the police a lie, but I hoped it would scare whoever it was away. I knew I would have to call them, but the thought of waiting 10 or 15 minutes alone with whatever was outside terrified me even more. The only response was 3 more slow knocks, calm and patient, as if they weren't afraid at all. That's when I finally called 911. I gave my address, my voice shaking, trying to explain the situation. The operator asked what the person was doing now, and as I started to say they were still standing outside my door, a horrific sound cut through the call. A loud, deliberate scratch dragged across the wood, one long scrape, like claws or something sharp being pulled slowly against my bedroom door. I completely lost it, begging the operator to send help faster, knowing deep down that whatever was on the other side of that door was no longer pretending to be human. I begged the operator to get help there as fast as possible. That's when the door handle began to twist back and forth, violently. My heart nearly stopped, but the lock held. About a minute later, 3 more slow knocks echoed against the door, identical to before. Then, silence. Absolute silence. The house stayed quiet for the entire 10 minutes it took for the police to arrive. When they finally reached my bedroom, there was no one there. Whoever had been outside my door was gone. The only thing left behind was a deep gash carved into the wood on the back of the door, long, jagged, and unmistakably made by a knife. The officers searched the house, trying to figure out how someone could have gotten in, but it was nearly impossible. The place had too many entrances, too many windows, most of them old, with unreliable locks. In the end, there were no leads, no suspect, no explanation. My parents flew back home as soon as they could. Nothing else happened after that night, but I never felt safe there again. Every dark hallway felt threatening. Every empty room felt watched. Even the woods surrounding the house seemed wrong. Too quiet, too close. About a week later, I could have sworn I saw someone standing among the trees near my window. It was dark, though, so maybe it was just a shadow. I don't live there anymore. My parents sold the house a few months later. Whatever was happening in that place, or whoever was watching us, was never discovered, and it probably never will be. It started as a completely normal Friday night. I was home alone in my tiny suburban house, ready to do absolutely nothing, just game, watch YouTube, and maybe sleep in. The weekend finally arrived, and I felt the relief of not having to deal with work for a few days. I showered, cracked open a couple of beers, and fired up my PlayStation. Hours passed, the glow of the TV filling the room, my controller clicking in rhythm. It was peaceful, safe, until I ordered pizza. Ordering should have been the perfect end to the night. I opened the app, clicked my favorite pizza, and leaned back, expecting the usual wait. But the minutes dragged on. 45, 50, nothing. A notification popped up. Sorry for the delay, your order will be on the way soon. I shrugged it off, thinking nothing of it, even as exhaustion made my eyelids heavy. 15 minutes later, YouTube played quietly in the background as I dozed off, comforted by the ordinary hum of my house. Then the doorbell shattered the quiet. Multiple rings, insistent and urgent. I jumped up, disoriented, unsure how long I'd been asleep. My first thought, the pizza had finally arrived. Stumbling to the door, still groggy and lightheaded from the beers earlier, I opened it. A man stood on the porch. Ordinary looking at first glance, but something about him didn't feel right. I mumbled an apology. Sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long. How much do I owe you? He smiled politely, but his eyes were off. Too calm, too steady. There was a weight in the silence between us that I couldn't place. I didn't think twice, handing him the money and reaching for the pizza box. But when I glanced back down at the doorstep, the pizza wasn't there. What's wrong? I asked, confusion twisting into unease. He didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away into the dark. I blinked, staring after him. The porch light flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw him vanish before my eyes. The pizza? Still gone. The calm suburban night suddenly felt sinister. Something was very, very wrong. The guy looked slightly confused, so I clarified, asking how much I owed for the pizza. But as the words left my mouth, a cold realization hit me. He wasn't holding anything. No pizza boxes, no delivery bag, no uniform. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray hoodie pulled over his head, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched on long enough to make my skin prickle, like he was still processing what I had said. Then he smiled and casually told me not to worry, the pizza was still on the way. He stopped talking after that, just staring at me, as if that answer made perfect sense. Even through the haze of alcohol and exhaustion, I knew something about that exchange was wrong. Why would he be standing at my door if the delivery hadn't even arrived yet? Still, instead of questioning him, I muttered, "Okay." After a few more seconds of uncomfortable silence, I closed the door. I rubbed my face, trying to clear my head. The interaction replayed in my mind, every detail feeling stranger the more I thought about it. Part of me wondered if I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just too tired, too out of it to judge things properly. Trying to shake it off, I put on another video and sank back into the couch. Before I knew it, I drifted off again. This time, I woke up to a clicking sound. I couldn't tell what it was, but I knew I hadn't been asleep long. The video was still playing. I sat up, waiting for the doorbell or a knock, but nothing came. The clicking didn't repeat. Confused, I grabbed my phone, finally remembering to check the delivery app. But before I even unlocked the screen, something felt wrong. It was 4 a.m. I placed the order at 11 p.m. The pizza place closed at 1 a.m. My heart sank as I opened the app and finally saw the full update. The order had been delayed for over an hour before, being canceled entirely by the restaurant. That's when the thought hit me like a punch to the chest. If the pizza never came, then who had just been standing at my door? I got up slowly and walked down the hallway to the front door, checking through the peephole first. No one was there. The street outside was empty and silent. I reached down to unlock the door only to realize it was already unlocked. I must have forgotten to lock it when I answered earlier, too tired and out of it to notice. I opened the door and looked outside. Nothing, just a quiet neighborhood, dark and still. I was exhausted and slightly drunk, in no condition to make sense of any of this. I shut the door, then froze. The sound of the door clicking into place was the exact same sound that had woken me up earlier. My stomach dropped. In a split second, the entire interaction replayed in my head. I realized my mistake. He hadn't said he was the delivery driver I had, and he had simply gone along with it. The question that terrified me most was why? Why pretend? Why lie? I turned and looked back into the dark house. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave. I quietly walked down the hallway toward the couch to grab my phone, but just as I reached it, I heard movement in another room. Something shifted. I didn't think. I grabbed my phone and ran. I burst out the front door and didn't stop until I reached the end of the block. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes, but it still wasn't fast enough. Whoever had been inside my house was already gone. I gave the police every detail I could remember: what the man looked like, what he was wearing, what he said, even how long he stood there in silence. But there was nothing else to go on. No witnesses, no cameras nearby, no trace of him at all. Eventually, they told me that unless something else happened, that was probably where the investigation would end. I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count, trying to understand what really happened. Maybe the pizza order being canceled was just an awful coincidence. But the one question I can't shake is this. Why was a random man standing outside my house, ringing my doorbell at 4:00 the morning? What was he actually planning to do? The only explanation that makes sense to me is that he was looking for easy targets, empty houses, unlocked doors, people too tired or distracted to notice the danger. When I answered the door, he probably saw exactly what he needed to see. Someone drunk, exhausted, and not fully aware of what was happening. I'm almost certain he stayed outside after I closed the door, listening, waiting to hear whether I locked it. And when I didn't, he waited for me to fall asleep again. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't checked the app, if I hadn't realized my mistake, that night would have gone very differently. And I honestly don't think I would have been lucky enough to walk away from it. Asterisk. Hey guys, before you go, I just want to say thank you for sticking around until the very end. These stories, they're more than just creepy tales. They're reminders that sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters or ghosts, but the unknown, the unexpected, and the moments where reality just feels off. If you enjoyed these tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story that will keep you awake at night. And comment below, I want to hear what part freaked you out the most, or if you've ever had a night where something just didn't feel right. Maybe something like this actually happened to you. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, keep your doors locked, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones you never see coming. Asterisk.